I've used Obsidian to learn how to code in 3 different ways. I've used it to effortlessly learn new things like C, assembly, and data structures and algorithms. I've also self-learned web development to land 2 internships, and during my internships, I quickly learned new frameworks and libraries for the projects I was working on. In this video, you'll see how I prepared to learn, organized and took my notes, and used them to make progress towards, learning how to code. To prepare to learn, you need to first set intentions for what you want to achieve. And there's 2 ways you could do this. The first way you could do this is by creating a project for maybe the language or the framework you're trying to learn. So in my case, I have one for Angular. When I was learning it for a project at work, and in here you can just follow something like the OKR framework or maybe the SMART framework to plan out the project. And as you're doing this, use this time to figure out what resources you can use to learn. What's the main course or roadmap you're learning from, and what supplemental resources do you have at your disposal? You can also use a note like this to keep track of the different notes you create as a result of this project. I personally just went on Reddit and searched up what resources people would recommend and then put them all into a Kanban board. This just helped me keep track of the different content I was consuming, whether it be lectures, videos, or articles. And this is just created using the Kanban plugin, which you can install in the community plugins. To create a note like this, just search up Kanban, create a new board, and then you can create. If you want to learn more about how to set up these project notes or Kanban boards, you can check out my Building a Second Brain in Obsidian video. What I like about using a Kanban board like this is that when you create a new card, you can have the link, but if you also want to add maybe notes related to the source, you can actually just create a new note. So in this case, it was RxJS. I actually have one on RxJS as an example. So when you click on it, it can take you to the notes you took. I'm just gonna put this here. This stuff is pretty straightforward, so let's get more into how I organized these notes I took. If you're following a structured curriculum like school courses or maybe an online course, you could have a main school note that then branches into your courses, that then branches into different units and topics. Over here, I just use a query to find all of my notes with a course tag in it. And if you want, you can also add special parameters like setting the year and semester that you're currently on, so it only shows those ones. And if you want to learn how to set up something similar, you can check out this video on how I set up my school vault in Obsidian. Next is questioning how you're going to initially take notes as you're learning the information. Take a second and ask yourself, how often do you search for material based on the date you learned it? If you're taking notes for school, will organizing things by the lecture date really be useful? Instead of taking notes based on the source, consider taking conceptual notes instead. After dumping all the important stuff from a lecture onto a single note as you are taking it in class, it's time to break it up into its different ideas for a better understanding. I was too lazy to reorganize things, so I personally just created new atomic notes throughout lectures. Rather than passively consume information, it made me actively think on the concepts I was learning. So if we head to my course on data structures and algorithms, you can see that I just had a mini outline for it, and I just made a lot of connections and played around with a form of organization that made sense for me. It is a bit messy, but I don't know. I focused more on utility than how it looks. So if we look into one of these notes on binary trees, you can see that I just have different headers. I just have basic characteristics of the concept. I have some subtopics related to it. and I pretty much just use the headers and organization of the slides to create my notes. And over here, images take up a lot of space on your vault, which isn't good if you're using some form of syncing program like Obsidian Sync, or maybe just uploading it to the cloud. So what I do instead, I just use Yazo. So whenever I take a screenshot of something, it gets stored online. And I can just copy the markdown and put it in here. In school, there's some things that may not necessarily be easy to remember, so that's where we can rely on just memorization. And to do so, I like to use the spaced repetition plugin. So in the settings, you can set what hashtag you can use to determine whether a note should be turned into flashcards or not. In this case, I just had one called cards, and I set up subtags for each class I had, and then more subtags based on the unit. You can also change the syntax at which you create flashcards, and the time intervals on when you should see it again. As you can see in my note, I pretty much turned everything into a flashcard just so I'd be exposed to it more often. And on my way to school, I would just chip away at these cards. So if we were to open up Command Palette and review these flashcards, you can keep unraveling the subtags to choose what card set you want to review. In my case, let's just go to trees. And then you can see what note it's from, the header it's in, and the front of the card. Show the answer, see the back, and you can choose when you want to see it again. That's pretty much how I survived school. But if you're learning to code by self-learning, here's the problem that people may have. If you take notes on basic concepts and syntax, it'll be useful in the short term, but it might end up being clutter in the long term. After all, thanks to Google and ChatGPT, we have countless tutorials and resources at our fingertips. Instead, I think it's best to use it as a resource collection, kind of like a customizable place to store related bookmarks. If there's a really good resource that you found, I don't feel like there's a need to retype the things you've learned if the resource you read is presented in a way that's referenceable and easy to understand. Which is especially true if it's tutorials. Nonetheless, there can still be value found in taking notes of the content in these resources. Instead of having to reread the entire article, you can summarize it to save yourself time by condensing it into what you need. By having a record of what you currently know, you can have a higher order view for guidance on areas you're weak on. As you can see in my JavaScript note, I just have a bunch of different links that I was using to learn. I just kind of use it as a bookmark since I had the chapter I was on. Different resources I was using to play around with the language, and over here you can see the frameworks that build on top of JavaScript. And in here, it's more like a directory for all the notes I have, which in PKM terms is commonly referred to as a map of content. So whenever I was learning something new related to React, I would create a new note and then just add it here. So when I was learning components, I created a note for that and just jotted anything that I might need in the future. You can add diagrams, as I did in my school notes. You can add lines of code instead of having to Google it every time. As you can see, I just kept connecting all these different ideas through these links. So then we had React, and React, the framework is built on different components. And one of the things you can do in these components is to pass props, which is just data from the parent component into the child component. And in this case, I just have more examples. If we head to my Angular note, it's pretty much the same thing. If I felt like something was small enough, I just kept it in the main note. But if it started to grow, as it did for Angular observables, I decided to create a new note for it. Each programming concept will have its own specifics that may or may not be intuitive to you. So I don't know if there is some rigid structure you should always follow when taking these notes. After all, you mainly take notes to remember what you probably wouldn't, and that depends on the person. In my case, it was just a mix of syntax, different terms that I explained in my own words based on the different articles I synthesized. And yeah, just all the different nitpicks that I would have to remember if I were to use this in programming again. If we head to my React Redux note, which is also something I learned during my internship, it's pretty much the same process. I have a main summary, I have basic syntax, diagrams, and yeah, I could show you more of my notes, but it gets pretty repetitive. I think it's better off if you started turning your linear notes into more conceptual ones, which this video can help with. But if you're a bit more new to Obsidian, you can check out this guide that you can follow along with. Be sure to like and subscribe for more productivity related content like this. This has been John Maverick. Stay mindful.